She was punishment in her father's eyes, a disgrace to the family name. He gave her away like cattle, but to the man who received her, she was not a burden. She was the first thing he ever loved. The wagon lurched down the hill like it couldn't bear her weight. Each rock it struck rattled louder than it should have. She didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't even flinch. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the dust rising behind them like smoke from a fire already finished burning. Delilah Beckworth had once been the daughter of a man who carved his initials into courthouse stone. Beckworth Ranch stretched for miles across wild hills, with cattle fatter than the bankers who praised her father's name. But power, like pride, had one weakness: it couldn't stand to be embarrassed. And Delilah had embarrassed him, not by stealing, not by lying, not by sneaking off with stable boys or sipping whiskey under the dinner table. Her crime was more quiet than that. She stayed fat. Her whole life they tried to fix her. Hired tutors with cruel smiles and stricter rules, locked kitchens, meals measured by spoons and shame, dances she wasn't allowed to attend because no dress fit right and no boy would have her. But still, she stayed kind. That was what bothered her father most. She didn't hate herself the way he wanted her to. Until one morning, 3 months before her 18th birthday, he summoned her to the study. He didn't offer her a seat, just looked up once and said, "I've found a use for you." The papers were already signed. Delilah would not be married off. She would not be sent to boarding school. No, she would be given away, like property, to the one man her father considered lower than any man alive. A slave. His name was Isaac. Delilah had seen him once before. Only once. Tall, built like granite, and with the kind of silence that made people uncomfortable. He was the only slave her father hadn't sold, because he owed Isaac's father a blood debt that no money could clear. So Isaac was kept out of sight, working the farthest edge of the ranch near the canyon ridge, living alone in a barn so small even dogs didn't shelter there. And now Delilah was being delivered to him, like spoiled meat tossed to a stray. The wagon stopped with a jerk. The driver didn't help her down. Delilah stepped out slowly, skirts dragging, boots too new for mud. Her suitcase was small, only what she'd been allowed to take. The barn door stood open. She expected silence. Instead, Isaac was standing right there in the doorway. He didn't look surprised, but he did look tired. His eyes scanned her not with disgust nor desire, just confusion, like she wasn't supposed to be real. "You lost?" he asked, voice deep and slow like a river after rain. She shook her head once. "My father said I belong to you now." Isaac didn't blink. "I don't own people." She swallowed hard. "He said it was punishment for you and for me." That hung in the air like rot. Isaac stepped aside. She entered without waiting. The barn was clean, sparse, tools neatly arranged, a cot in the corner with a blanket folded square. She placed her suitcase down beside a bale of hay and sat on it, hands in her lap. He stood for a long time, staring like the world had tilted wrong. Finally, he moved to the far end, lit a lantern, and said nothing more. Night came heavy and full of coyote screams. She didn't ask for extra blankets, didn't cry, just wrapped herself in her shawl and curled into the corner where horses used to sleep. Sleep didn't come easy, but exhaustion always won eventually. In the morning, she woke to the smell of eggs. Isaac had made 2. He said nothing, just set the plate in front of her and returned to splitting logs by the door. Delilah stared at the food like it might disappear. No one had cooked for her before, not like this, not without expecting something in return. She ate slowly. Later, when Isaac returned with buckets of water from the creek, she met him at the door. "I'd like to help." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm not dead weight," she said quietly, "just heavy." His mouth twitched. Maybe a smile, maybe not. "You ever stack wood?" She shook her head. He handed her a glove. They worked until her arms ached, until sweat stained her collar, until her boots were caked in red dirt. But she never complained. He watched her closer after that. Not with hunger. With something more dangerous. Curiosity. Over the next few weeks, she became something her father never expected: useful. She mended harnesses, sorted seed, learned how to patch fences with wire so tight it sang in the wind. She milked the old goat named Mabel, braided rope, boiled beans without burning them, and even built her own clothesline from salvaged nails and stubborn will. She was alive in a way she never had been. And Isaac began to talk. Not much, but enough. One night after supper, he sat beside her near the fire pit and said, "My mother died in a place called Hollow Creek. They buried her behind the church, but the preacher wouldn't say her name out loud." Delilah didn't ask why. She just nodded. "My father," he ran, "took me with him. They found him before I turned 12. Branded me right after, said I needed to know where I belonged." She reached for his hand, hesitated, then held it anyway. "You don't belong to anyone," she whispered, "not even this land." He looked at her then. Really looked. And something in him softened. 2 days later, the sheriff rode up. With a letter. Her father was dead. Fell from a horse drunk, neck snapped clean. The ranch now belonged to his next of kin. Delilah. Isaac stepped back when he heard. "Means you're free now," he said. She blinked. "I always was." "No, I mean you can leave. You can go wherever, be whoever. You're not mine." She stepped forward, slow and steady, until she was inches from him. "I was never yours," she said gently, "but I hoped one day you might be mine." Isaac didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then he reached up, touched her cheek with hands that had known only labor and war and loss. He traced the edge of her jaw like it was sacred. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded once. And for the first time in his life, he kissed someone without fear. There were no fireworks. No music. Just breath and warmth and the knowledge that for once, neither of them had been chosen. They had chosen each other. That night they sat side by side and talked until dawn. Of dreams, of what freedom meant, of what it didn't. And in the morning, they left the barn behind. Together. The land her father left behind wasn't just scorched by cruelty, it was cursed by memory. Every fence post, every gnarled oak tree, every rusted gate reminded Delilah of a man who built kingdoms with coin and shame, who could not bear to be seen beside a daughter who didn't fit the mold he'd carved for her. But that land was hers now. By ink and blood and law, it belonged to the woman he tried to erase. And she had no intention of letting it rot. Isaac stood with her on the porch of the ranch house 3 days after the funeral. The building was tall and proud in the way only old houses dared to be, columns cracked with time, windows boarded, porch steps worn crooked by generations of heavy boots. It was all still intact, but just barely. One good storm and it'd buckle, the same way the family had. She didn't flinch at the thought. "We can sell it," Isaac said, his voice low. "Take the money, go somewhere new." Delilah's eyes didn't leave the horizon. "If we leave it like this, then everything he did wins." Isaac understood. So they stayed. The first month was quiet but hard. Half the workers had vanished the day the old man died. No one would say it out loud, but none of them wanted to work for a woman, much less one married, unofficially or not, to a former slave. Delilah kept her chin up. She learned names she'd never bothered with before. Jose, who ran the cattle line. Clara, who'd cooked in the back kitchen through 3 fires and 2 droughts. Amos, who handled the accounts and kept his ledger locked like it held secrets. They were wary of her. They'd seen too many Beckworths with silver tongues and black hearts. But Delilah wasn't her father. She cooked with them, not above them. She fell off a horse during roundup and laughed before she limped. She burned her hands pulling bread too early from the oven and still ate it anyway. Isaac worked beside her. No title. No special treatment. He was just Isaac, strong, steady, and terrifying to anyone who dared insult her. And they did. One morning, Delilah rode into town for supplies. She wore a blue dress, simple but clean. Her hair was tied back with a ribbon Isaac had found in a trunk full of her mother's things. She didn't expect applause, but she didn't expect spit either. The shopkeeper, a man named Granger, refused to meet her eyes. "We don't stock for your kind," he muttered. "My kind? Fat and foul," he said, barely above a whisper, "and sleeping with beasts." The next moment passed fast. Too fast for thought. A hand grabbed Granger by the collar and pinned him against the wall behind the counter. Isaac's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "You don't speak to her again. Not here, not anywhere." Granger spat. "You think you scare me, boy." "I don't care if you're scared," Isaac said. "Only that you remember." They left with what they came for. No one followed. Word spread like wildfire. The Beckworth girl wasn't just stubborn, she had muscle. But more than that, she had resolve. And that changed things. Slowly. Granger never apologized, but his wife left eggs at their doorstep every Sunday after church. 2 local boys asked Isaac for work helping him mend a fence line, and when they came back the next day with food for Mabel, Delilah invited them in without a second thought. It wasn't about winning the town's affection. It was about ownership, of her name, of her weight, of her story, of her life. And she wasn't giving that up. Still, not everything healed with time. One morning, Delilah found Isaac sitting on the edge of the pasture, staring at the hills. She sat beside him, silent. He held something in his hand, a chain. Thin, rusted, twisted in on itself like a snake trying to forget its shape. "This was mine," he said. She took it gently. "You keep it to remember." He shook his head. "I kept it because I didn't know who I was without it." Delilah looked at him, really looked, the way she did that first night, past the strength, past the scars. "You're the only man I've ever met," she whispered, "who knows how to carry other people's pain without making it smaller." He said nothing, but his eyes grew wet. That night they stood under the stars. No church, no preacher, just 2 hands joined and vows exchanged not with flourish but with quiet promise. "I will never walk behind you," Delilah said. "And I will never walk in front of you," Isaac replied. Together, or not at all. Months passed. The ranch grew strong again. The garden flourished, especially the squash. Isaac joked it was her doing, that her roots had finally taken hold. She laughed so hard she cried. But beneath the laughter, something stirred. Pain. And she kept it secret. At first, it was just tiredness. Then it was blood. Then it was the doctor, holding his hat in his hands and not meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Beckworth. There's nothing I can do." She nodded once. "Is it?" Isaac began, but she stopped him with a hand. "It's mine to carry." She didn't tell him how fast it was growing, how deep, how unfair. She just loved him harder. She cooked more, even when her hands shook. She kissed him longer, even when her lips ached. She wrote a journal in secret. And one morning, when she couldn't rise from bed, she looked at him with tears she hadn't allowed in years. "I was never punishment," she whispered. Isaac nodded. "You were a gift." Then she smiled and went quiet. For days he didn't speak, didn't eat. He just sat beside her body and read every page she left behind. Every memory, every confession, every word of love. And then he built. not a gravestone. A chapel, small, made from reclaimed wood, with wildflowers planted out front. He called it Mercy. People came, not for sermons, just to sit, to listen, to remember. They brought food, tools, laughter. And one day, a little girl stepped inside and asked, "Is this where the fat lady with the warm smile lives?" Isaac knelt. "No," he said gently, "she lives everywhere now." The girl nodded. "Good," she whispered, "then she can hear me." And in that moment, Isaac knew Delilah hadn't left. She'd simply become the place where all the broken pieces came to rest. Ledgers to a girl named Celia, who knew numbers like she'd been born counting them. More children showed up at the chapel, asking questions about the fat lady who told stories, and Isaac, never much of a talker, began to answer. He told them about Delilah's laugh, how it started low in her chest and climbed like a fiddle tune on a summer night. He told them how she once tried to ride a wild pony, just because no one believed she could. How she made the best biscuits west of the river, and used her last good Sundays sewing clothes for the orphanage across town. He did not tell them how she died. Some stories are too sacred for small mouths. Then, on the second anniversary of her death, the first letter arrived. No return address. No stamp. Just a folded parchment slipped under the chapel door, creased with careful hands. Inside, only a single line. "She loved you more than you'll ever know. Please don't forget her." Isaac held the note for hours, his thumb wearing the edge raw. He told no one. Not yet. But he built a shelf inside the chapel, tucked behind the altar, and placed the letter there like an offering. A month passed. Then came another. "She saved my life once. I was going to run into the river. She gave me soup and it made me want to stay. I never told her, but now I'm telling you." And then another. "She called me beautiful when I thought I was. That word still carries me." The letters never stopped. By spring, there were dozens. Dozens of lives she'd touched without fanfare or witness, people who'd been fed, comforted, seen. Most didn't leave names. Some only wrote a sentence. But each one carved a deeper truth into Isaac's ribs. Delilah had been more than his wife. She had been a movement. And she was still moving. So he answered. One by one. With pen and paper, with carved tokens, with small gestures. He mended roofs for strangers, left stew on porches, built benches in places where old women liked to sit. He did it not as penance but as continuation. He was hers, and she had never been idle. By the end of that year, folks stopped calling it Beckworth Ranch. They called it Delilah's Mercy. And Isaac, once feared, once hated, became something else. A keeper. A steward. But even stewards carry scars. And scars itch when the weather shifts. It began with a man. Tall, clean-cut, smiling like he owned the sun. He rode up one Sunday just before dusk, his horse too fine and his boots too polished. Isaac was sweeping the chapel floor, but paused when he saw the man dismount. "Evening," the stranger said, tipping his hat. "Name's Felix Beckworth." Isaac's grip tightened on the broom. "I know who you are." Felix smiled wider. "Cousin to Delilah, once removed. Not by blood, of course, my daddy's side. We heard she passed. Sorry about that. Real tragedy." Isaac didn't speak. Felix nodded, as if waiting for a cue. When none came, he pressed on. "I'm here for the land." Isaac stared. Felix cleared his throat. "See, legally, her transferring ownership to a former slave. No offense. Well, it's complicated. The county judge up in Elmsford says the paperwork wasn't properly notarized." "She signed it," Isaac said quietly. "Sure, but laws change. And let's be honest, you've done a fine job keeping it together, but this place, it could be so much more. I've got investors lined up. Gentlemen from back east. They want to turn this whole valley into a vineyard. Isaac stepped forward. One slow, heavy step. Felix didn't flinch, but his hand twitched near his coat. This ranch, Isaac said, voice low, was paid for in love, in loss, in days she gave up to keep others breathing. You think I care what paper you're waving? Felix's smile vanished. I'm giving you a chance, he snapped. Sell it, walk away with dignity. Isaac's eyes didn't leave his. You want this land, then you better come with fire, because I won't give it up while I've still got breath. Felix mounted his horse with a sneer. This ain't over. Isaac watched him ride off, then walked inside and pulled the ledger from the shelf. He opened Delilah's last entry. A recipe for soup. He closed it slowly and began writing letters. Within 2 weeks, the valley filled. Wagons, families, children with dirt under their nails, old folks with tear-lined faces. They came from towns and hollers and broken places. Each one held a letter. Each one had a story. They came to fight. Not with guns, but with roots. Celia organized a land petition. Jose gathered tools. Children planted signs reading, "Mercy stands." And Isaac stood at the front gate every morning, arms crossed, waiting. Felix returned in a coach, with lawyers and the sheriff. But when he saw the chapel surrounded by over 50 families, his lips curled into a thin, bitter line. You can't stop progress, he growled. Isaac held up the latest county deed, signed and sealed, with testimonies from every soul Delilah ever fed. This is progress, he said. You think a fat woman and her slave husband can stop a dynasty? Felix spat. Isaac's eyes narrowed. No, he said, but love can. And then he turned his back. Felix left that day with dust on his boots and a valley he'd never own. Spring turned to summer. Isaac aged, hair graying, hands slower. But the chapel never emptied. Children married there. Babies were blessed. Stories were told. And on the 5th anniversary of Delilah's passing, the chapel bell rang for the first time. Forged from her old cooking pot, strung with wire from the fence she helped mend. And it sang like her laugh, bright, rising, unstoppable. That night Isaac sat alone beneath the stars. He opened a letter addressed in a child's scrawl. Inside, she made me feel real. I hope I can do that for someone one day. He smiled and whispered to the night. She still does. The 6th winter came without warning, lurching in on a wind so sharp it peeled bark off the sycamores and cracked the ground before frost even settled. Isaac had seen many winters before, some mean, some long, but this one moved like it had a score to settle. The livestock brayed restless by night, and by day the sky hung heavy like it wanted to bury the valley in silence. Still, the chapel bell rang each morning. Mercy did not sleep. Isaac's hands, once thick and calloused with labor, had grown stiff. The joints popped with cold. His steps, slower now, carried more weight than they used to. But the eyes behind his weather-worn face were as sharp as they had ever been, still watching over the land, still guarding the place where Delilah's spirit ran like water through every beam and fence post. Children who'd once toddled through the chapel now worked its fields. Teens he'd taught to patch windows now taught others to mend roofs. Mercy wasn't just a place anymore. It was a rhythm, a chain of people pulling each other forward through time. But progress never walked alone. It always brought shadow. And this time it wore a blue coat with gold trim. The government man arrived on horseback, fancy saddle, hat tilted just so. He came with papers and a smile, 2 things Isaac had come to distrust more than hunger. Mr. Isaac, he asked, not dismounting. Name S. Merton Pike. I represent the County Assessment Board. Isaac didn't shake his hand. You're late. They usually come after spring thaw. Pike chuckled, like they were sharing a joke. Well, sir, this year we're reassessing early. There's been interest in this valley. Isaac folded his arms. Interest's been here before. Don't see it walking these fields. This ain't that kind, Pike said, still smiling. This is legal interest, bound in ink. Turns out a clause in the old Beckworth estate deed wasn't resolved. A transfer discrepancy. Isaac narrowed his gaze. Speak plain. According to the charter, the land wasn't fully yours to inherit. Delilah Beckworth, bless her soul, signed it, sure. But the clause says any marital union had to be legally recognized by the county to permit a full transfer. And seeing as you two weren't legally wed. The wind whistled. I suggest, Pike continued, that you begin preparations to vacate. We've got bidders lined up. You'll be offered a relocation grant, of course. You'll be taken care of. Isaac didn't answer right away. He looked past Pike, to the barn he and Delilah had rebuilt with their own hands, to the pond she used to sit beside on hot days, dipping her feet while snapping peas, to the row of flower beds that bloomed wild and defiant each spring, sunflowers, marigolds, dahlias, taller every year, stubborn like the woman who planted them. Then he turned back. You'll have to drag me out, he said, voice cold and calm as creek ice, and you'll do it over her bones. Pike's smile faltered. We can take this to court, Mr. Isaac. Do that, Isaac said, but when you do bring a lunch, it's gonna be a long fight. That night, Isaac wrote no letters. He rode up the hill, past the chapel, past Mercy's Edge, to the only other man he trusted with war. Jose. The old ranch hand lived in a converted stable, tools hanging in neat rows, every bolt and harness glinting under the moonlight. He opened the door before Isaac knocked. You heard, Isaac said. Jose nodded. I ain't gonna let em take it, Isaac whispered. I know. Not just for her, for everyone. These kids, this place, they believe in something because she made them believe. If they burn that down. They won't. They stood in silence, the kind of silence men only share when the fight is real, and there's no use pretending otherwise. What do you need? Jose asked. Time, witnesses, proof that she owned it heart and soul. You'll get it. And he did. Over the next 2 weeks, Mercy stirred to life like it hadn't in years. Every adult who had ever stepped foot in the chapel came back. Every child she'd bandaged. Every widow she'd cooked for. Letters were copied. Statements sworn. The chapel became a war room, its pews stacked with papers and memories and faith. Isaac stood at its heart, not as a preacher, not as a soldier, but as a husband. A storm came, as they knew it would. Not with thunder but subpoenas. The county called a tribunal to decide the land's fate, and on that cold gray morning, Isaac walked into the courthouse wearing the only suit Delilah ever saw him in, black, worn and patched in the elbow. Pike was there, smug as ever, backed by 2 young lawyers and a judge with eyes like Riverstone. I see you've brought a crowd, the judge noted, eyes drifting toward the full bench behind Isaac. Dozens had come, old men, young mothers, farmers, children, even Celia, 6 months pregnant with her hand resting protectively over her belly. Isaac didn't speak until called. When he did, it was with calm. My wife was fat, he began, stunning the room to stillness. And I say that with love, not shame, because it's how she was treated for most of her life, like something broken, like something too big for kindness. He turned toward the bench, eyes sweeping the room. She changed this land by showing people like her and people like me that worth isn't written in paper. It's written in sweat, in care, in meals cooked, in children held. She didn't own this land because someone signed it over. She owned it because it bloomed under her feet. One of the lawyers objected. The judge silenced him with a hand. Isaac continued. You want your codes, your clauses. I have letters. I have faces. I have a chapel that's fed more mouths than any fine house you've ever seen. He pulled out a box, old, wooden, worn. Inside were the letters. Dozens. Hundreds. He held one up. She saved me from drowning in my own skin, he read. She never knew. I hope she does now. The judge listened. Pike fidgeted. The crowd breathed as one. When the ruling came, it did not come with cheers. Just tears. And silence. This court recognizes the validity of mercy, the judge said, voice heavy, and of the woman who gave it life. Isaac nodded once and sat down. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall. Someone handed him a cup of cider. Another squeezed his shoulder. Then came a small hand, tugging at his coat. He looked down. A little girl, no more than 6. She had thick glasses and freckles like dust on bread. You're her husband, right? I am. She smiled. She saved my sister once, gave her shoes. Mama said that's why my sister didn't freeze last year. Isaac knelt, his old knees creaking. Your sister's real strong. Yeah, she said, like Delilah. And then she ran off. That night the chapel glowed. Candlelight flickered in every window. Laughter returned. Not to replace grief, but to sit beside it. Isaac watched from the steps, his hands folded, the wind ruffling his coat. Still here, he whispered to the stars. And above, something rustled the sycamore. Maybe a breeze. Maybe something more. Mercy was safe. But the story wasn't done. Not yet. Summer came late, lazy and humid, like it had overslept and was trying to make up for it with long gold evenings and lightning bugs thick as snowfall. The chapel's whitewashed walls gleamed beneath the sun, and Mercy Valley pulsed with life again. Gardens swelled with tomatoes and squash. Children ran barefoot through the pastures, and somewhere in the orchard, a wedding song floated soft across the breeze. Isaac sat on the porch, whittling. The wood curled under his knife, smooth and steady. He wasn't carving anything in particular, just letting the rhythm of it calm his fingers. The trouble was quiet now. Pike and Felix were gone, buried under the weight of their own paper trails, and the court had ruled as final. But peace had its own kind of ache, especially when you'd been holding your breath for so long. Papa, a small voice called. He turned. Amara stood at the gate. 8 years old, all knees and elbows, her dress patched at the shoulder, curls wild around her face. She'd come to the chapel with her mother after the flood in Crosswind last fall, and somehow she'd never left. Isaac didn't know if she called him Papa because she missed her real one or because that's what all the little ones called him now. Either way, he didn't correct her. What is it, baby? There's someone at the bottom of the road, looks lost. Isaac rose, his knees crackling like old wood. He walked slow, not with suspicion, but with the kind of patience that came from having seen too many arrivals turn into departures. When he reached the bend, he saw her. A woman alone. Her dress was city-stitched, too fine for dirt roads, but its hem was torn like she'd walked too far in shoes not meant for walking. Her hair was pinned up, but strands had fallen loose, and there was a weariness about her posture that struck Isaac as familiar, like she'd come carrying something too heavy to set down. She noticed him when he was still 50 feet away, straightened her back, lifted her chin, and held something out in her hand. A necklace, simple silver, with a small oval locket that gleamed like memory in the sun. Isaac stopped. His breath left him all at once. That necklace. He had placed it on Delilah's neck the day they said vows. He'd seen her fingers clutch it through labor pains. Seen it lay against her chest when she slept. And he'd buried it with her, wrapped in her prayer cloth. His voice came out thin. Where did you get that? The woman looked like she might crumple. She stepped forward, tears on her lashes. "My name is Adelaide," she said. "I don't know how to explain this, but I didn't steal it, I swear." He said nothing, only nodded once slow. "Come inside," he said. "We don't talk truth in the dust." Inside the chapel, Celia brought water. Adelaide sat on the front pew, her fingers tight around the necklace. Isaac lowered himself onto the chair across from her. Around them, the quiet settled like an old friend. "I was raised in Crescent Hill," Adelaide began. "My mother, she died when I was born. My father ran a tannery, rough man, never spoke of her, wouldn't even let me ask. When I was old enough, I found her Bible in the attic. Tucked in the back was a photograph. A woman, big, beautiful, smiling like she had the sun in her bones." Isaac felt something tighten in his throat. "She looked like me, same nose, same eyes. I never knew who she was, but I started dreaming of her, over and over, a voice saying mercy, over and over." Isaac didn't breathe. "I didn't even know Mercy was a place. I just followed the name, walked from town to town. Then I saw a paper, an article, about this chapel, this land, and her name." She opened her bag, pulled out the clipping. A newspaper from 2 years prior. The title read, "Widow's Legacy Saves Valley from Land Seizure." Beneath it a photograph, faded and grainy. Delilah, standing in the orchard, laughing, her arms around 2 children. Isaac reached for the necklace again. His hands shook. "It was buried with her," he said quietly. Adelaide nodded. "I found it in my coat pocket one morning. It wasn't there the day before, and the coat was brand new." She looked up at him, eyes wide and wet. "I think she brought me here." Isaac leaned back. Let the weight of her words settle. The silence stretched long. Then slowly he nodded. "Sometimes," he said, "the land doesn't just carry bodies, it carries callings." That night they sat by the fire. Adelaide didn't speak much, but when she did, her words painted pictures. Of a life spent searching for something she couldn't name. Of being called too much by every man she ever knew. Of standing alone at windows, wondering why the world always felt like it was looking past her. Isaac listened. Not as a preacher, not as a father. Just as a man who knew what it meant to be found too late. As the fire died down, he asked, "Do you believe in second homes?" Adelaide looked at him. "I believe in second chances." He smiled. "Same thing." The days passed slowly after that. Adelaide didn't leave. She helped at the kitchen, sat with the children, sewed with Celia. Her laugh filled the chapel hallways like it had been waiting all this time for someone to pick up the melody Delilah had left behind. Isaac didn't ask more about the necklace. Some things didn't need explaining. They needed living. But not everyone in Mercy was so ready to let go of their doubts. One night, after the harvest supper, Isaac overheard 2 ranch hands whispering outside the barn. "Don't sit right, her showing up like that. Necklace and all, ain't natural. She too pretty to be alone that long, probably a Beckworth trick." Isaac stepped into the moonlight. The men straightened. "You got doubts?" he asked flatly. They didn't answer. He nodded. "Good, hold on to them, but hold your tongue in front of her. We don't tear people down for carrying ghosts, especially not here." He turned and walked back toward the chapel. The necklace shone in Adelaide's hand through the open door. Like it had found its way home. But storms always followed peace in Mercy. Always. 3 nights later, a letter came. Unmarked. No signature. Inside scrawled in jagged ink. "She ain't who she says. Ask her who Josephine is. Ask her why she ran." Isaac stared at the paper. Then lit it on fire. But the flame didn't erase the question. That evening he asked. They sat on the chapel porch, stars scattered above like prayer beads across velvet. Adelaide, he said, slow and careful. Who's Josephine? Her face paled. She looked down, took a long breath, then whispered, she was my sister. Isaac said nothing. She died when I was 16. I didn't save her, I ran. Silence. She was in trouble with a man. I heard her scream and I froze. I ran instead of fighting. She didn't make it, and I never forgave myself. Isaac closed his eyes, felt the ache of her guilt as if it were his own, then reached out and covered her hand with his. We all run from something, he said, but the ones who stop, who face what chased them, they're the ones worth following. Her shoulders trembled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. The tears came later, when she read the letter Delilah had left behind. The one Isaac hadn't opened until that moment. The one that had sat at the bottom of her prayer box for years, sealed in wax. Inside, you will not be alone, even when I'm gone, even when it doesn't make sense. Let mercy find you again, and when it does, open your door. Adelaide wept then. And Isaac, he whispered to the wind, you never stopped loving. And for a moment, the trees bent as if nodding. Mercy had found her again. And this time, it would not let go. The days that followed passed like honey, slow, golden, thick with something sweet neither of them dared to name. Adelaide moved through the chapel like she'd always belonged there. She kept to small tasks, the kind Delilah had once favored, sweeping the porch, sorting herbs in the kitchen, mending clothes in the sunlight that poured through the stained glass windows. The necklace never left her neck. It hung just above her heart as though it had always known where to rest. And Isaac found himself waking before the bell not because he had chores to do, but because he wanted to watch the light come through her window first. He didn't speak of it, didn't have to. His hands moved steadier now. His steps, though slower, had more purpose. When he watched her laugh, he felt like he'd remembered a song he hadn't heard in decades. But even sweetness, left out too long, can sour. And this valley had long memories. One afternoon, while Isaac and a group of boys were mending fence posts along the eastern ridge, the thunder of hooves broke across the hills. Not wild, not panicked, but measured, determined. 3 riders crested the hill, their coats black, dust clinging to the cuffs. The lead rider had a silver chain across his chest and a badge on his belt, Sheriff Brant. Behind him rode 2 deputies, new ones, unfamiliar. One kept his hand close to the revolver at his hip. Isaac rose from his knees, set the hammer down. Sheriff, he said, wiping sweat from his brow, didn't expect visitors today. Brant didn't smile. Need a word, he said, private. The boys scattered. Isaac gestured toward a nearby stump. They didn't sit. She here? Brant asked. Who? Don't play games, Isaac. He sighed. Adelaide's inside, if that's who you mean. Brant's jaw tightened. She wanted in connection to a death, a man in Crescent Hill, a gambler named Lyle Preston. Body was found in his parlor, throat cut clean. Witnesses say a woman matching her description left town that morning. Isaac felt his gut drop. She told me about her sister, Josephine. Brant nodded slowly. That's why we didn't come sooner. It matched the timeline, but new evidence came in. Turns out Preston was seen arguing with Adelaide 2 days before the murder. Locals say he tried to claim Josephine owed him a debt, that he came after Adelaide next. Isaac's hands curled into fists. She's not a killer, he said. Brant didn't answer right away. Not asking for judgment, just truth. We've got to ask her to come in. She's not under arrest yet, but if she runs, it'll change. Back at the chapel, Adelaide was kneeling by the altar, lighting the evening candles. When Isaac walked in, she turned, smiled softly, but the look in his eyes stopped her. What happened? He sat on the front pew. Told me a man died in Crescent Hill, Lyle Preston. She froze. I didn't touch him, she said quietly. Isaac didn't move. But I wanted to, she admitted. When I saw him again. After Josephine died, I stayed in that town for a year. Every time I passed him on the street, I imagined it, but I never acted. I left when it got too heavy. He studied her face, the sorrow, the fear, and beneath it, the rawness of someone who had been hunted more than once in her life. I believe you, he said. She sat beside him, knees trembling. I can't go back, she whispered. That town, that man, they already buried me once. I won't give them the shovel again. Isaac didn't speak. He rose, walked to the door. Sheriff Brandt waited outside. She's not running, Isaac said, but she's not leaving this chapel either, not until you prove she did more than survive a man like Preston. Brandt looked past him. Into the stillness of the sanctuary, he sighed. I'll give it 3 days, that's all I can do. After that they'll send someone else, and they won't knock first. Isaac nodded once, then we best use the time. And they did. He sent riders out, boys from Mercy who knew how to ask questions without being seen. He reached out to Celia's cousin in Crescent Hill, a clerk with loose lips and sharp ears. Slowly, a new story came into focus. Preston had enemies. Dozens, old debts, bitter lovers, a barkeep owed back wages, a shopkeeper whose daughter he'd mistreated, even a cousin who'd threatened him over a land dispute. The list grew. But it was one name that made everything shift. Ansel Worth, Preston's former business partner. He'd skipped town the morning after the murder. And the last person seen entering Preston's home that night was Adelaide. It was Worth. Isaac read the account twice, then handed it to Brandt when he returned. You said you wanted truth, Isaac said. Brandt scanned the statements, his face hardening. He turned to Adelaide. You're clear, he said simply. I'm sorry for the fear. She nodded once, lips pressed tight. As the riders left, Isaac stood by the gate until the dust settled. Only then did he turn back to her. You still thinking of leaving? He asked. Adelaide didn't answer right away. She walked past him, hands brushing the lavender planted by the fence. The scent clung to her dress, familiar and warm. I never thought I'd belong anywhere, she said finally. But this place, it keeps forgiving me, even when I can't. Isaac stepped closer. Mercy doesn't mean forgetting, he said. It means staying in spite of it all. She looked up at him, and for the first time didn't look away. That night the chapel doors stayed open. A summer breeze moved through the halls, lifting the curtains gently. Adelaide sat with Celia, helping with mending. Isaac lingered near the hearth, carving. He wasn't sure what the shape would be yet. Maybe he didn't need to. As the candles burned low, he walked her back to her room. At the door she paused. Do you think, she asked softly, that someone like me could be loved? Isaac reached out. Touched the locket. I think you already are, he said. She smiled, quiet and radiant, and shut the door gently behind her. The next morning the sun rose early. Adelaide was already at the garden, sleeves rolled, dirt on her hands. Isaac watched her from the chapel steps, coffee in hand. He didn't know what would come next. But he knew this. Mercy had found her. And this time he wouldn't let it slip away. The season shifted. Summer ripened, and with it came the quiet swell of certainty. Mercy Valley had always known how to endure, how to stitch itself back together after storms. But this time the mending wasn't of land or law. It was of hearts. Of one man's silence and one woman's long, aching search for a place to be more than a memory. Adelaide stayed. Not because Isaac asked. Not because anyone begged. But because every morning when she woke to the rustle of trees outside the chapel window, she felt something bloom in her chest. A stillness. A whisper of belonging. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady, like the steady thrum of a heart finding rhythm after years of panic. She began planting roots. Quite literally. The small patch of earth behind the chapel turned into a garden under her hands. First tomatoes, then beans, then a few brave sunflowers that lifted their golden heads toward the hills as though they'd been waiting to stretch all their lives. Children gathered around her, helping, asking questions. She answered every one. Isaac watched from the porch each day. Sometimes he helped, more often he just observed. There was peace in watching her laugh, in seeing her kneel to tie a child's shoe or lean down to whisper comfort into a small ear. It reminded him of Delilah, not in look, not in voice, but in spirit. A kind of quiet strength that wasn't easily broken. The necklace never left her. And Isaac never asked again where it had come from. Some truths weren't meant for this side of life. Some were born in prayer and sealed in graves. But not all the valley had found peace in her presence. Not yet. One morning Isaac found a note pinned to the chapel door, written in charcoal, messy and hard-pressed. A woman like that don't just appear. Be careful who you let close, preacher. He folded the note slowly, slipped it into his coat. Didn't tell her. Didn't need to. The whispers were soft, but she heard them, not in words, in pauses, in how hands once eager now hesitated, how the market stall across the bridge no longer welcomed her with smiles. In Mercy Valley, doubt moved like dust, quiet, choking, impossible to sweep out once settled. Celia noticed too. They stood at the washing line one evening, folding sun-warmed linens. They'll come around, Celia said. Adelaide gave a small, tired smile. And if they do? Then we keep folding linen, and we wait. Patience is the soul's way of growing roots. Adelaide held that truth close. She didn't stop showing up. Didn't stop loving them. Even when they flinched from her kindness. She taught the little ones to bake bread, read scripture to the widows, cleaned after suppers and held lanterns for late-night births. Slowly, some hearts softened again, and the ones that didn't, well, she prayed for them, each name, each hardened face. Isaac saw what she was doing, how she was choosing love in a land that had once made her run. He asked her, one cool morning as they shelled peas in silence, "Do you ever miss the life before all this?" She looked up. "No," she said, "but I remember it every day." He nodded. "Me too." Then the news came. A rider arrived, hat askew, dust on his coat. He dismounted before the chapel and handed Isaac a letter, sealed with an official stamp. It was from Crescent Hill. A will had been uncovered. Lyle Preston S. And inside scrawled in arrogant, inky loops, a final confession. If I die by unnatural means, look to Ansel Worth. He's owed me blood since the rail contracts. If he got to me, good. Let it end there. That was it. One sentence. One name. But it was enough. The town withdrew its inquiries. The whispers dried. The note on the chapel door was never mentioned again. That night the valley sang. A bonfire lit up the orchard. Fiddles played songs older than most of the trees. The children danced, sugar high on baked apples and sweet cider. Isaac stood near the fire, hands behind his back, watching it all. Adelaide joined him quietly, brushing ash from her skirt. He turned to her. There were no words. Not yet. But there was something in the way he looked at her. A promise forming. The next morning he asked. Not on bended knee, not with a ring, but with a hand held out across the kitchen table. Stay, he said, not just here but with me. Adelaide looked at the hand. Then at the locket resting against her collarbone. Then back at him. And nodded. Not a tear, not a speech. Just yes. The chapel bells rang 3 weeks later. No crowd, no spectacle. Just a service under the open sky, the orchard in bloom behind them, and the valley breathing peace for the first time in what felt like generations. Celia stood as witness. The children tossed flower petals. Isaac took her hand and didn't let go. When he said her name that day, he didn't say it like a question anymore. He said it like a vow. Adelaide. His. Later, under the stars, after the fire had died and the guests had gone home, they sat on the chapel steps, fingers intertwined. "I still don't know how that necklace got to me," she whispered. Isaac looked out over the dark hills. "I do." She glanced at him. "It was Delilah," he said. "I think she knew I'd stop looking, so she found someone who wouldn't stop walking." Adelaide's breath caught. The trees rustled, soft and low. A wind moved across the fields. And for the first time in all her life, Adelaide didn't wonder if she belonged. She knew. Because mercy didn't always roar. Sometimes it arrived quiet, carried in the hands of those who still dared to believe in love after loss. And Mercy Valley, for all its shadows, had always been a place of second chances. She'd come with only a name. She'd stayed because of grace. And now she was home,